After my dad's death, my stepmom changed the locks and told me, "This house is mine now, you have nowhere to go." I was devastated until my dad's best friend showed up and handed her a document. When she read the first line, she screamed, "This can't be right." I stood in front of the house I grew up in, the place where my dad and I had spent years together, staring at the locked door like a stranger. My stepmother, Diane, stood on the other side, arms crossed, a smug smile stretched across her face. "This house is mine now," she said coldly. "You have nowhere to go." I felt like the air had been punched out of my lungs. My father had passed away just days ago, and I was still drowning in grief. And now, this? Diane had always been difficult. She married my dad when I was 16, after my mom died. At first, I thought she was just strict. Then, I realized she was controlling. When I turned 18, she made it very clear that I wasn't her responsibility. "If you want to live here, you follow my rules," she'd say. And those rules? They changed on a whim. I was constantly walking on eggshells. My dad tried to keep the peace, but I knew he felt torn. Now, he was gone. And Diane wasted zero time making her move. I had been staying with a friend while we made funeral arrangements. When I came back to pick up some of my things, the locks were changed. I wasn't even allowed inside. "You can't do this," I said, my voice shaking. She laughed. "Oh, but I can. Your father left everything to me. You're an adult. Go figure your life out." I stood there, stunned. My dad was not the kind of man to just leave me with nothing. But Diane was so confident, so certain that she had won. I called my dad's lawyer, Mr. Carter. He had been a family friend for as long as I could remember. When I told him what happened, he just said, "I'll be there in an hour." When he pulled up, he wasn't alone. My dad's best friend, Mike, stepped out of the car with him. Mike was like an uncle to me, a guy who had been around for years. He had this serious look on his face, and I could tell something big was about to happen. Diane opened the door when they knocked, her fake sweetness dialed up to an 11. "Oh, Mr. Carter, Mike. What a surprise," she said, her voice dripping with fake politeness. "I assume you're here to clear up any confusion?" "Actually, we are," Mr. Carter said, stepping past her and into the house like he owned the place. Mike followed. I stepped in behind them, my heart pounding. Mr. Carter pulled out a folder from his briefcase and handed it to Diane. "Before you make any more decisions, you might want to read this." Diane snatched the papers with an eye roll, but the moment her eyes hit the first line, her face drained of color. "This can't be right," she whispered. She flipped through the pages frantically, her breathing picking up. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. "What's wrong, Diane?" Mike asked, arms crossed. "You seemed pretty sure of yourself a few minutes ago." This must be a mistake," she stammered. "This isn't possible." I leaned forward, trying to read over her shoulder, but Mr. Carter didn't leave me hanging. "The house," he said, turning to me with a small smile, "is yours." My brain barely processed the words. "What?" Mike clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Your dad had a will. A real one. Not whatever nonsense Diane here thinks she has." I felt my knees go weak. My dad had left the house to me. Diane was shaking now. "That's not possible. He left everything to me. I have the documents." Mr. Carter raised an eyebrow. "Do you?" She ran down the hallway and came back a moment later, shoving a crumpled stack of papers into his hands. This is the will. It says everything goes to me." He skimmed the pages, then let out a dry chuckle. "Diane, this isn't your will. This is a draft. An old, unsigned draft that was never filed. The actual, legal will was updated last year. And according to this, you get a stipend to help with living expenses, but the house, the savings, and everything else go to his son." I had to grip the back of a chair to steady myself. Diane's hands shook as she snatched the new will and scanned it. The deeper she got, the worse she looked. "This is fake," she said, her voice shrill. "It has to be fake." Mike laughed. "It was filed with the court, Diane. It's very real." Tears welled in her eyes. No, I gave up years of my life for this. I took care of him. This was supposed to be mine. I wanted to feel bad for her. But then I remembered the way she had looked at me just an hour ago, smug and victorious. She had tried to kick me out of my own home. You need to leave, Mr. Carter said, his tone all business. Her head snapped up. What? You heard me. You don't own this house. You never did. You need to pack your things and find somewhere else to stay. She started shaking her head violently. No. No, I have rights. I was his wife. Mike stepped forward. And you'll get what's outlined in the will. But the house? You're not welcome here anymore. She let out this horrible screech and threw the papers onto the floor. Then she stormed upstairs, slamming doors, screaming about how this was a setup, that we were all liars, that my dad had been brainwashed. I stood there, still trying to process everything. Mr. Carter turned to me. Do you want to give her time to pack, or do you want to call the police now? Diane wasn't going to leave without a fight, that much was clear. And something in my gut told me that this wasn't over yet. Diane stormed upstairs, slamming doors so hard the walls shook. We all stood in silence for a moment, listening to her rage echo through the house. Mike let out a low whistle. She's taking this well. Mr. Carter sighed and rubbed his temples. I've dealt with some nasty inheritance disputes, but this? This is next level. I was still processing everything. A part of me had feared I would be homeless, out on the streets with nothing but a bag of clothes. And now, within minutes, everything had changed. This house was mine. My dad had made sure of it. But I knew Diane wasn't done fighting. And I was right. A few minutes later, she came storming back downstairs, dragging a suitcase behind her. But the way she was moving? Too fast. Something felt off. She stopped in front of us, breathing heavily, her face red and twisted with rage. I'll leave, she spat. But don't think for a second this is over. You people are disgusting. Taking a widow's home? What kind of monsters are you? Mike scoffed. You tried to take his home first. You just didn't expect to lose. She ignored him and turned to me. Her eyes burned with so much hatred I actually felt it. You're going to regret this, she said, her voice eerily calm. I promise you that. Then, without another word, she yanked open the door and stormed out. I exhaled. Is that it? Mr. Carter gave me a look. No. That was just the beginning. The first attack I barely had 24 hours of peace before Diane made her first move. The next morning, I woke up to banging on the front door. Loud, angry banging. I ran downstairs, half awake, and looked through the peephole. Cops. I felt my stomach drop. I opened the door cautiously. Are you, my name? One of the officers asked. Yes. We received a report that you're illegally occupying this house. We need to talk. I felt my blood boil. Diane. I took a deep breath and stepped aside. Come in. I have paperwork proving this house is mine. The officers exchanged a look before stepping in. I grabbed the legal documents Mr. Carter had left with me and handed them over. They scanned through them quickly, and within 5 minutes, it was clear this was a false report. The lead officer sighed and rubbed his forehead. I'm really sorry about this. It looks like your stepmother tried to file a complaint saying you were trespassing. This happens more than you'd think. I let out a humorless laugh. What happens now? We'll file this as a false report, he said. But listen, people like her? They don't stop here. Stay alert. As soon as they left, I grabbed my phone and called Mike. She sent the cops, he asked, sounding more amused than surprised. She's trying to fight this, I said. She's not giving up. Mike sighed. She's desperate. And desperate people do stupid things. And, once again, he was right. The fake lawsuit 2 days later, I got a letter in the mail. From a lawyer. Diane was suing me. Suing me for unlawfully withholding her rightful inheritance. I read the letter 3 times, my hands shaking. I called Mr. Carter immediately. He laughed. Let me guess, he said. She's trying to claim the house through some nonsense legal loophole? I told him everything. He sighed. Listen to me carefully. This is bullshit. A scare tactic. She thinks if she drags you through court, you'll settle and hand over something. She's wasting her money, I muttered. Oh, she's probably not even paying for it, Mr. Carter said. She probably found some bottom-feeder lawyer who works on contingency, meaning they only get paid if she wins. And since she's not going to win, this is going to be a fun waste of time for her. Still, the idea of going to court made me uneasy. What should I do? I asked. I'll handle it, Mr. Carter said. I'll respond to the claim, and then we'll get it dismissed. In the meantime, stay far away from her. And I did. But Diane? She wasn't done. The break-in a week later, I came home from grocery shopping to find my front door wide open. My heart stopped. I crept inside, adrenaline pumping through my veins. The living room was trashed. Drawers pulled open. Papers scattered. Someone had been looking for something. I checked the house, my hands shaking. No one was inside. But as I walked to the kitchen, I found something that made my blood run cold. A photo of me and my dad, ripped in half, sitting on the kitchen table. I grabbed my phone and called 911. When the police arrived, they looked around, took notes, but there was no proof of who did it. She didn't even take anything, one officer said. It looks more like intimidation. I didn't need proof. I knew who it was. I called Mr. Carter and told him everything. That's it, he said. I'm filing for a restraining order. Mike was furious. She's unhinged. If she's willing to break in, she's willing to do worse. And once again, he was right. Because the next thing Diane did was the craziest thing of all. The break-in should have been the final straw. Any normal person would have realized they lost. But Diane? She wasn't normal. Mr. Carter immediately filed a restraining order. The court granted it fast, considering the police reports from her false claim and the break-in. She was officially barred from coming near the house. I thought that meant I'd finally have peace. I was wrong. The house isn't yours anymore. 2 weeks passed. No cops at my door. No new court papers. No signs of Diane lurking in the shadows. I actually started to believe she had given up. Until I came home one night and found a foreclosure notice stuck to my front door. Foreclosure? I stared at the paper, my brain scrambling to make sense of it. How the hell was my house in foreclosure? I grabbed my phone and called Mr. Carter. I need you to come over. Now, I said. He was at my door within the hour. As soon as he saw the notice, his face turned grim. This isn't right, he said, pulling out his reading glasses. There's no reason your house should be in foreclosure. We went inside and pulled up all my financial records. I had no mortgage, my dad had paid off the house years ago. There was no debt tied to the property. And then Mr. Carter stopped flipping through papers. He just stared at one. I leaned over. What is it? He turned to me, his expression unreadable. There's a new loan taken out against the house. I felt my stomach drop. What? He slowly put the paper down and looked me in the eye. Diane took out a mortgage on your house. A huge one. And now, because she hasn't paid, the bank is foreclosing. For a second, I thought I misheard him. How the hell did she do that? The house isn't even in her name. Mr. Carter exhaled sharply. It was. For about a month. And then it clicked. I remembered what he had told me weeks ago, that my dad had updated his will the previous year. Before that update, Diane actually did own the house. And during that brief window, before the real will was discovered, she must have gone to a bank, claimed the house as hers, and taken out a massive loan. And now that the bank wasn't getting paid, they were coming for the house. This wasn't just theft. It was fraud. Mr. Carter wasted no time. The next morning, we went straight to the bank. It didn't take long to confirm everything. Diane had provided false documents, claiming she was the sole owner. The bank approved the loan based on those lies. The moment the real will was found and the house was transferred to me, she stopped paying. Mr. Carter turned to the bank's legal team. You do realize this is fraud, right? The bank's lawyer looked pale. If what you're saying is true, then, yes. And it's a big problem. I'd suggest handling this quietly, Mr. Carter said. Before we sue you into the ground for approving an illegal mortgage. The bank immediately put a hold on the foreclosure, promising to investigate. But I wasn't done. I went straight to the police. And that's when things got even crazier. Diane's other victims, the detective we met with, wasn't new to Diane's name. The moment I explained what happened, he sighed. Diane, last name? He asked. Yes. He rubbed his forehead. She's already under investigation for something similar. We just didn't have enough evidence. Until now. Turns out, Diane had done this before. Not just to me, to other men she had married. She'd find older, well-off men, convince them to let her handle finances, then take out massive loans behind their backs. She had bled multiple men dry. The only difference? She never got caught. Until me. I handed over all my documents, all my proof. Mr. Carter backed me up with every legal paper we had. The detective's eyes lit up. "This is it," he said. "This is what we needed to arrest her." Diane's arrest. I wasn't there when they arrested her. But I saw the mugshot on the news. She had been caught trying to flee the state. The police found her in a motel, her car packed with stolen valuables, fake IDs, and over $50,000 in cash. Her charges? Grand larceny, mortgage fraud, identity theft, obstruction of justice. The news reported that she could face up to 20 years in prison. Mike called me the night of her arrest. Well, that's one way to handle a problem. I exhaled, feeling the weight finally lift off me. She almost won, I admitted. Mike snorted. Yeah. But you had something she didn't. What's that? He chuckled. A brain. The final twist: a few months later, I was officially cleared of all ties to Diane's debt. The bank, desperate to avoid a lawsuit, erased the fraudulent loan from their system. My house? Fully mine again. And Diane? I never saw her again. But a year later, I got a letter from one of her ex-husbands. It was a thank you note. Because of my case, other victims had come forward. More charges had been filed. Diane was going away for a long, long time. And that? That was the real revenge. The end. Diane's arrest was just the beginning of her downfall. The moment the news spread, people started coming forward. Ex-husbands. Ex-business partners. Even an old landlord she scammed out of rent. Turns out, Diane had spent most of her life hopping from one victim to another, stealing whatever she could before disappearing. And now? She had nowhere to run. Her worst nightmare. Losing everything. With Diane behind bars, the real punishment started. First, the IRS got involved. Turns out, she hadn't just scammed people, she had lied on her taxes for years. When they started digging into her finances, they found hidden bank accounts, unreported income, and a massive tax fraud case. Then, the civil lawsuits started rolling in. The bank sued her for fraud. The other victims sued her for damages. Even the state wanted a piece of her for unpaid debts. And the best part? She had no way to fight back. By the time it was over, she owed hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees, penalties, and restitution. And she had $0 to her name. Her assets were seized. Her bank accounts were frozen. Everything she had ever stolen? Gone. She was completely, utterly broke. Her final plea, begging me for help. One day, I got a letter in the mail. From Diane. I nearly threw it away. But curiosity got the best of me. Inside was a handwritten note. I know you hate me, but please. I have nothing left. No money, no home, no one to turn to. I made mistakes, I see that now. Please, if you have any heart, help me. I laughed out loud. This woman, the same woman who tried to steal my house, ruin my life, and leave me homeless, was now begging me for help. I didn't respond. But I did keep the letter. Because reading it felt like victory. Diane's fate, a fitting end. With no money and no allies left, Diane had nowhere to go. She spent years bouncing between jail, courtrooms, and halfway houses. The last I heard, she was living in a cheap motel, working some dead-end job, and still owing more money than she could ever pay back. No more fancy houses. No more scamming rich men. No more easy life. She was alone. Broke. Forgotten. And me? I was happier than ever. The real revenge, living well with Diane permanently out of my life. I finally had peace. I kept the house. Fixed it up. Turned it into a place my dad would have been proud of. Mike and I still talk all the time. Mr. Carter still laughs about the whole ordeal. And as for Diane? She became nothing but a bad memory. In the end, she lost everything. And I won. Because sometimes, the best revenge is watching your enemy destroy themselves. The end.